everyone to week 4 topic 4 lesson. In this lesson, we are going to look at Gestalt theory. The couple of things that we will be discussing in this lesson. First of all, we are going to discuss what Gestalt theory is or what it means, and then explore the different principles of Gestalt theory. And finally, we are going to look at or discuss the applications of the different principles of Gestalt theory, followed by the conclusion. So, what is Gestalt theory? The German term, or it is a German term, it means configuration or structure. It makes a reference of or to the way individual components are structured by our as a whole. The term describes how something put together often is translated into English as a form or shape or unified whole. There are no exact equivalent in English. Form and shape are the usual translations. In psychology, the word is often interpreted as pattern or configuration. So Gestalt theory is an idea that emerged in the early 20s and believes that the whole of an object was seen as greater than and more important than its components or parts. This idea contributed to the study of sensation and perception, which we are going to look at in this topic, actually in the next PowerPoint presentation. The aim of the theory was to understand how humans give meaning to the world they live in and how they identify the order and disorder. Moreover, according to Gestalt theory, humans interpret what they see in the world depending on what they expect to see, and we try and find a pattern in which they see and experience. In other words, people will try to find ways of how to make meaning of what they see around them. The Gestalt theorists are number one, Max Wertheimer was the founder of the theory, followed by the co-founders of Gestalt theory. They are Kurt Kofka, Wolfgang Goller, Kurt and Goldstein, Ernest Mach, and so those are the theorists that has or had contributed to Gestalt theory. Let's move on to the principles of Gestalt theory. After Gestalt psychology was founded by Gerd Kofka, one of the key co-founders of Gestalt theory, he published the principles of Gestalt psychology, and he presented the Gestalt theory and its principles. The following principles from Gestalt psychology describe the way human perception works and how they give meaning to the objects and events around them. So these principles are often referred to as Gestalt laws. So the first law of Gestalt or Gestalt principle is the law of proximity. The law of proximity states that when the human eye sees elements, they are placed close together. We perceive them to be a set or a group. An example is the way we read a text. When letters are put together, our perception. Have a look at the diagram below. Our eyes tells us that there are three groups. Here is that when our eye sees things that are grouped together, it tells us that they are in a group, or they can be seen as one group and not separated. Hence, the diagram on the left-hand side tells us, or our eyes tells us that there's one group on the left-hand side, And even though the same number of shapes is on the right hand side, because it is shapes have been separated, our eyes tells us that they are two groups. So our human eyes only sees what are close together, and so they perceive them to be in a group or in a set. The next law is the similarity law. Another way humans tend to group elements in the visual field is by looking at the similarities. Okay, so whenever something is presented, and if it's a new event or is it an event, as human beings, we will try and find ways to look for similarities. Elements that look alike will automatically be grouped together. I think one common example during sports or sport event is when people tend to wear the same color shirt and are perceived to be on the same team. This is called the law of similarity. Okay, so our eyes will try and catch the things that are similar. In this diagram, there are only two types of element present. It is either colored or non-colored. Although they are all in the same shape, our eyes tells us that the elements are either green or brown. The next principle is continuation. Also, part of the Gestalt psychology is the continuation principle or law of continuity. States that human eye prefers to see objects as continuous or smooth rather than disjointed or discontinuous or separate elements. So looking at the diagram below, you can see that the human eyes prefer to see objects that are continuous, they're not interrupted, and they flow smoothly to the top or to the bottom. Okay, so our eyes prefer non-disruptive lines. And the next part is the closure, or the next principle is closure. It explains how the humans prefer to see complete elements. When seeing incomplete elements, we can fill in the missing information to still perceive it as complete. This principle is often used for advertisements, and usually they come up with indicative phrases for the public to complete. This approach is believed to trigger interest and create further involvement from the audience. Okay, so look at the diagram below. I'm sure everyone would see it as a shape of a ball. Now, the human eye tells us it's the image for the image of a ball. Now, when we take a closer look, for example, there are 6 pentagon black shapes being placed in a circle with the white gaps in between. So why do we say that it has a shape of a ball? That's where the law of closure in Gestalt theory comes in. It explains that the human eyes play an important role in trying to complete information or missing information and perceive it as complete. And then the next one is the law of figure and ground. Figure here is the image and ground here is the background. The principle of figure and ground explains how humans in the visual field makes a distinction between figure and ground. The figure is the object and person that's central in a visual field, while the ground is less present and perceived as the background. So this explains how human perception of an object or situation can be different from perception, which depends on what is perceived as the figure and the ground. Have a look at the diagram below. the human eye could either perceive the two dark phases of human faces with the white round in the center, or they would perceive the flags with the two black sides. This reminds us that the human beings perceive objects or situations differently from others. Okay, so that's about the law of figure and ground. I think that's the end of the different principles of Gestalt theory. We shall now move on to the application of Gestalt theory. So here we'll discuss a few ways of how we can apply Gestalt theory in the different fields. First of all, um, the first application is basic psychology. Basic psychology, uh, basic psychological processes such as perceptions and attention are greatly influenced by Gestalt theory, psychology. These basic psychological processes are fundamental and applied to practical matters. Let's get an example here. Example, the development in the study of perception and perception contributes to programs that are carried out to avoid accidents, for example, by improving road signs. This can only be done through the knowledge we have on perception. And the next one is the next application is communication. To be able to trigger the attention of the audience, people working in the field of communication, creativity, they also use Gestalt theory. For people working as artists and publicists or designers, it is important to understand how the human mind interprets images. Now, this knowledge can help them to produce work that communicates to the audience in the way they intended to do. Okay, so that's the second application. Number three application is problem solving. Problem solving covers a lot of areas, including teaching. So to solve a problem, it's essential the problem you are working with. In Gestalt psychology, it is important that a problem consists of components that are related and interact with one another. To solve the problem, you need to reorganize these components to be able to discover a new solution. So this creative reorganization of the components of the problem is called productive thinking. Gestalt psychologists recommend using productive thinking to reach inside different uses. And the last application is education field. In education, Gestalt psychology is applied to perception and problem solving, as I've mentioned earlier. The application of Gestalt psychology to education implies that teachers should encourage students to solve a problem by discovering the different elements of the problem and how they are related. Um, so the question is there a way in which you could apply the knowledge to your classroom as future teachers? Look back at the principles we have just read through. How could you apply these principles to the classroom teaching and learning? Okay. So we have 5 principles there: proximity, similarity, continuation, closure, and figure ground. How can you apply these 5 principles to classroom teaching and learning? And finally, in this lesson, we have defined what Gestalt theory is and have listed the main contributors of the theory. We've also discussed the major principles of Gestalt theory and their application to everyday life. And I think that's the end of our video. Thank you very much for listening. I will see you in our next